I was in awe of Fred's talk because as I thought back, we made the first distributed feedback injection laser in 1974, and it was so difficult to even etch a grating into a semiconductor and get a single emitter to emit light that it's just amazing to see the degree of integration that Infinera has achieved here. It's congratulations. This talk's a little bit different than the prior ones because it really we'll talk about Nick's contributions to how do you get something into the world of business rather than on a technical paper. And obviously you saw that a lot of the students that Nick graduated have done that, but I think we may have been one of the first that really carried Nick's technologies and Nick's capabilities further toward commercialization. So the talk is going to be a little bit lighter-hearted. As Russ pointed out, Nick really loved farm boys, and I sold a few cows in order to get myself into the University of Illinois. And so this is going to follow a Jack of the Beanstalk type of theme as we go forward. And Nick obviously had the magic beans, as we will show going forward here. Let's see. So I ended up at the University of Illinois, and it was kind of interesting that I was interested in going to graduate school in solid-state devices, and I really didn't have a feeling for anything having to do with LEDs or semiconductor lasers. And I happened to get into an advisor's office when I first entered school and was reading a brochure about what was happening in the solid-state group, and this brochure talked about lasers, and that looked really interesting. So despite coming here to work on semiconductors and silicon, I ended up getting pushed over to Nick's lab and talking to him, and luckily he did like farm boys, as Russ described. So obviously we had some really interesting people involved, and got a very good set of tutoring along the way by two Nobel Prize winners, Nick, and a variety of colleagues, that some of which you've heard from today. So Nick's gardening advice. One of the things I learned early on was, in fact, I had been here for a semester, got married, it was in the winter, didn't take a honeymoon, and in the summer I took a 3-week vacation. And I came back for my honeymoon, and I came back from that, and the older guys in the lab said, "I'm surprised you're still here." And it turns out that that was a real no-no. They explained to me that if you're not here and hear Nick's ideas, and you better be here at 9 p.m. on Saturday night, because his best ideas come on weekends. And I found out that that was the case. And actually, I was on the phone yesterday with the reporter from the local newspaper here, and my wife overheard me describing one of the vignettes that I was talking about to her, and my wife said, "Yeah, he has not taken a 3-week vacation ever since." So I learned that lesson well. And it's also key when you're starting a company to do the same thing. It's a 24/7 job. some reason. Here we go. Another thing that I learned from Nick, which again really didn't have much to do with technology, but was key to starting a company, and that is small groups can do amazing things. Nick always told us, we've got 6 or 7 guys here, and you guys have to beat, and he used more colorful language. He said, you got to beat the goddamn guys from Bell Labs. They've got 200 people there, and you can do the same thing. We've got to get there faster. We've got to get there smarter. You can do the same thing here at University of Illinois, but you got to get in there and do it and just make it happen. And so, again, small groups can really make that happen when they have the right mix of people and energetic people that work 24/7. So after University of Illinois, I joined another Nick colleague, Bob Burnham, at XEROX Palo Alto Research Center. And one of the things about, as Russ Dupuis described earlier, Nick always used baling wire. The reason he liked Farm Boys was you could get things done with baling wire and just improvise anything you could. Well, one of the good things about XEROX was they actually had money to do things, and we could buy different pieces of equipment, but we still had to improvise, and none of these techniques were really known. So we developed the liquid phase epitaxy, the grading construction methods. We did some work on VCSELs, where we actually had the first patents on vertical cavity lasers. But the real key to starting the company was the work on phased array beam scanning. And one of the things Nick had taught us along the way was do lots of different things. You don't necessarily win by working on one thing. And XEROX was nice in that regard, because XEROX in general wanted us to put together semiconductor lasers for printers, but they also wanted us to publish. So we were allowed to, as long as we, and this was a Nickism too, always have a publication if you're going to a conference. And of course, this was one of the phased array beam scanning was a device where XEROX wanted laser printers. It would be nice to use a scanner, an all-electronic scanner for printer technology. And this was a first try at that. This device had 2 outputs and were separated by 10 microns. And by changing the current to each of those outputs, you could change the refractive index in the chip. And just as in a phased array radar, electronic phased array radar, you could change the phase between the 2 output emitters and get that beam to steer. Now, it did work, and we published a paper, but of course it only had 2 resolvable spots when you only have 2 elements. So the next step along the way was, let's put in 10 elements and see if we can get it up to 10 resolvable spots. And in fact, that's what we were thinking about trying, but now in 1978, we had a problem. How do you get current to each of those 10 elements individually? Now, Fred, in his last talk, solved that problem in spades, but 1978, I couldn't figure that one out. But the good news was that we were able to make that device work. It was pulsed in 1978, and we needed a few more tools developed in order to make it more and more practical. So you've heard from Russ Dupuis. I went to a conference with Bob Burnham. Russ in 1978, I think, probably showed us this wafer that was an inch in diameter, really shiny, really looked good. And we were using 1 centimeter semiconductor chips to do liquid phase epitaxy. It wasn't a very good technique. You couldn't control the thickness very well. And so because XEROX had some money, we decided we would immediately go try and do MOCVD. And that was a key to making a lot of the better and better devices along the way. We took that 10-element, I took that 10-element phased array device, and I needed a talk for the device research conference, in fact. And this 10-array element device, after making a few of them with MOCVD, had sat in a box for probably 3 or 4 months because it wasn't really a very high priority thing until I had to have a talk for the device research conference. And one night I was in the lab and trying to figure out what to do for the conference, and also I called my house, and my wife, you know, what are you having for dinner tonight? Liver. And I said, oh, no, I don't like liver at all. I'm going to stay in and work a little later tonight, honey. So that's the input from Mrs. Scifres. And this was around 5:30, by 11 o'clock at night, after putting a lot of neutral density filters in front of the photodetector and trying to make sure everything was calibrated, we'd taken this 10-element phased array chip up to 600 milliwatts CW. And as a reference point, the best lasers that were out there in the market and had been published at that time were in the range of 5 to 10 milliwatts CW. So I thought this is pretty cool. And along the way, along the way, we did a little more work and got that up to 2.6 watts of CW power. And in the next chart, I have a handheld diode laser that's probably emitting about 1 watt. It's powered by 3 flashlight batteries in a little container. And below it on the bench is an argon ion CW laser with 1 watt of output power, similar power levels. But it takes a 50 amp line going into the back with a cord that's about 1 inch diameter. It took 5 gallons of water to cool it, and so it kind of said, gee, it's pretty revolutionary to be able to do this with flashlight batteries. That excited the folks at Spectra Physics. That photo actually appeared in Fortune magazine, I believe. And so it got Spectra Physics thinking about the fact that their laser might have a few problems long term versus the diode laser technologies. By the way, this is an aside to the story, but I just got an award from the Laser Institute of America, and I was given the talk and showed this slide, and they're responsible for all the laser safety. I got a few comments after. In fact, this slide, it's kind of funny. I got an email from one of my grandsons. That photo appeared in his 8th grade physics book. And I'm going, uh-oh, you know, that's not teaching laser safety to the 8th graders. Anyway, Spectra Physics got excited about it, and they came over and said, what are you going to do with this technology? And I said, I don't think XEROX is going to do anything with it, but I'd like to do something with it. And so we put together a team from XEROX and Spectra Physics, and decided to move forward. XEROX put in $1 million plus 5 years of technology and some manpower, and Spectrophysics put in $3 million plus some sales and marketing expertise, and started the company. And interestingly enough, Spectrophysics wanted to purchase the company after the 5 years that XEROX had committed to the technology transfer. I kind of objected to this at the time because I thought, you know, if we're starting a company, we should do it at whatever the market value is at the time we're exiting the company. But XEROX management decided better and decided that that was the way we should do it. This is another bit of a side. Because of that, I left and went to Polaroid to start their electronic camera group. And my reasoning was, gee, this is a small startup. I've got 5 kids. This sounds really risky compared to Polaroid, which is a big established company that just got $1 billion settlement from Kodak, and they're going to put it into this electronic camera lab. Well, I think you probably know that 5 or 6 years after this, Polaroid went bankrupt. But anyway, I came back after going to Polaroid for 8 weeks because I really loved the technology, and that was very fortuitous, quite frankly. So when you start the company and you're from Nick's lab, you're kind of thinking that the publication level is all that matters. But in fact, you can't sell publications. And when we first made these high-power lasers, all they would do is last for about 100 hours, and then they would fail. We couldn't figure out what in the world was going on. XEROX was supposed to figure this out. I was supposed to be running the company and hiring people to sell the product. But it's good that Nick trained us to work 24/7, because after 9 months, we had nothing to sell yet, and it was Christmas. And XEROX people all went home for Christmas. And myself and another fellow from SDL went over to the XEROX lab, found the problem. The initial problem was there were voids in the indium solder that we were using. And once we solved that problem, we were able to get products out on the market at 100 milliwatts CW, about 20 times what the available power was in the marketplace at that time. Now, when we began the business, those 1984 lasers, there was only a market. Nobody knew how to use these high-power lasers. And we sold about 60 of them in 1984, but we found out that 30 of them went to one customer, but we couldn't figure out what they were using them for, and they actually didn't have a name. And that was because this customer was in a U.S. government black program, and they wouldn't tell us their name. But they did call up, and the fellow, and I'm not sure whether he was actually using his correct name or not, said, this is 6 months after we sold it, he said, would SDL, Spectra Diode Labs, be interested in doing space-qualified diode lasers, government work? And I said, no. You know, XEROX and Spectrophysics are both commercial companies. They don't want any government work. And then the fellow said, well, we've just spent $50 million in cost overruns with another company in the U.S., we can't tell you who, but are you sure? And of course, our total revenue that year was probably in the $100,000 range. So it didn't take me too long to figure out that maybe I should talk to these guys and actually do that. And it turned out to be absolutely critical, because obviously when you work on a satellite program, you have to develop high reliability lasers, And these are some of the technologies that we developed under their government funding money over about a 6 or 7 year period, which allowed us to address the long-haul fiber communication market with high reliability devices later on. One of the key elements in terms of improving the reliability of these lasers for the government program, and by the way, we finished that government program. We spent $10 million in total over that 6 or 7 years, took over more of the job of the other company, the unnamed other company, and so it was a complete success. We won a number of government awards that you'll never hear about because they can't talk about them. But one of the shortfalls of our device was the mirrors would break down. And the Holonyak impurity-induced disordering patents, as as John referred to, were a key to improving the reliability of those devices. We achieved 4 times the reliable output power, and that's initially. Now they're up to 10 or 20 times over time, because the mirror area was absorbing light before. Once you create a transparent mirror area, keep the current off of the facet, you can go up in power enormously. And that was really the magic bean that helped us climb to the promised land of the golden egg. I mentioned that Spectra Physics wanted to buy out SDL, and that had been a problem with me initially because there was kind of a fixed price, low value for the buyout. But because of the government black program, Spectra Physics couldn't buy us because they were foreign owned. And it turned out that the employees got to buy the company instead of Spectra Physics for that bargain price. So you never, in research, you don't know where things are going to head. You also don't know where things are going to head in business. We ended up doing a leverage buyout. The employees bought about 40% of the company. The venture capitalists bought about 60%. And we went public in 1995 instead of at 40 million purchase at 300 million valuation. The key product, because of the impurity-induced disordering and all of the other technologies that went into it, was a strain layer 980 nanometer pump quantum well laser. This device had really low threshold. It had excellent output mirror capabilities. And the lifetime, because of the government program and reliability improvements, achieved over 1 million hours. And it was key to going into the erbium-doped fiber amplifiers that now power the fiber optic internet. That particular product was 60% of SDL's revenue by the year 2000. And I should say that the other 40% is rather interesting too. It's actually why I got the Laser Industry LIA award a couple of weeks ago. The other major market was really diode pump solid state lasers, which turned into diode pump fiber lasers, similar to fiber amplifiers, but fiber lasers. And now those are out there. You can do, they're up to 10 kilowatts of CW power. Actually, they've been demonstrated up to 100 kilowatts of average optical power. And they cut, weld, used throughout the automotive industry, among many others, drill holes, fiber lasers are now really very widely used. Again, you wouldn't think that that was possible when you initially make a 600 milliwatt CW laser in your lab, but that turned out to be huge market application, the other 40% of the revenue for SDL. So, and going forward, I think you'll probably see those in, you know, for a long time there was the Star Wars theory that you could use lasers to knock missiles out. I think the fiber laser, diode pump fiber lasers are now headed in that direction. So that's probably where that future goes. Anyway, we achieved a very profitable company and sold the company to, we became one of the top 25 NASDAQ companies in terms of market cap. Sold it for $41 billion, which was the largest technology buyout at the time in the year 2000. And so that was, we did find the golden egg and the bag of gold at the top of the beanstalk. Along the way, we had help from, and there were, I believe, 7 direct descendants from Nick that, so over 10% of Nick's graduates came to SDL directly. We had help from a lot of other graduates in the industry. As you've seen, I think Fred had a kind of a complete list of different technologies that all of which ended up in the SDL lasers. And then there were second generation folks that came from Russ's lab and Dan Dapkus' lab and other places that also joined SDL. So SDL really benefited from Nick's technology and his insights into how to get the job done. So for that, I thank you. That's the SDL story. Thanks.